Hey guys, had a chapter that I wanted to kind of go through with you in Isaiah 58, and this was something that really spoke to me this morning and really kind of outlined a lot of the misconceptions behind fasting and the Sabbath and the purposes for them and things like this. So we're just going to go through it and then we'll talk about it as we go. So starting in verse 1, cry aloud, spare not. Lift up thy voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgressions, and the house of Jacob their sins. So here it is, Isaiah is talking about showing the house of Israel their sins. And one thing that I kind of wanted to point out here is that typically when we're involved in a pattern of sin, we're the last ones to see it. This is one of the reasons for actually having accountability partners and having other people who walk with us, who are on the same path as us, who genuinely want to serve God and want you to succeed in serving God as well. Because once we start getting into sin, we become blind to it ourselves, we self-justify and things like this, and then we need those other individuals to hold us accountable and to let us know that, hey man, I mean, you're getting off path. I see you're starting to focus on other things. You're not putting God first, and we kind of call each other out there in the spirit of love because we want each other to finish the race well. So he's calling out here and he's telling them, show the house of Israel their sin. But this is Israel's response. He says, yet they seek me daily, or this, he's kind of responding for them, but he's saying this is their response. Yet they seek me daily and delight to know thy ways, or tonight to know my ways, as a nation that did righteousness and forsook not the ordinance of their God. They ask of me the ordinances of justice. They take delight in approaching to God. And one thing that I want you to see here is that they're putting on kind of a face of religiosity. They seek him daily, but not in the spirit of which they should. He goes on in verse 3, and this is Israel's response. They say, wherefore have we fasted, they say, and thou seest not? Wherefore have we afflicted our soul, that thou takest no knowledge? Behold, in the day of your fast ye shall find pleasure, and exact all your labors. And what he's talking about here is, he says, wherefore have we fasted? Haven't you seen? He's calling them out and he's saying, you guys are not serving God. And their response is, well, we've been fasting. I mean, don't you see us afflicting our souls? Don't you see us kind of, bound down in sackcloth and ashes, and we're throwing dust on ourselves and stuff like that. He's like, you don't see us basically doing all these things? And he's saying, behold, in the day of your fast, ye find pleasure and exact all your labors. He's like, you're doing it for yourself. He goes on and he says, in verse 4, he says, behold, ye fast for strife and debate, and to smite with the fist of wickedness. Ye shall not fast as you do this day, to make your voice heard on high. And he kind of calls them out here, and he was like, look, your only fasting, your only reason for religiosity and all the things that you're doing it for yourself. You're not doing it because you want this relationship with God to grow or anything like that. You're doing it strictly for yourself. He says that you strife and debate and to smite with the fist of wickedness, and that, if you go back to the Psalms, you see numerous places where even David prayed for the destruction of his enemies and things like that. It's not wrong to want to see evil vanquished. But one of the things that we're seeing here is that the Jews here are using fasting as kind of a religious key, kind of a lever that they can pull to get God to fight their battles for them. And it's kind of like, okay, well, it doesn't really matter whether I have a relationship with God. All that matters is, as long as I fast, as long as I pull this lever right here, then God basically becomes a robot and he's going to do what I want him to do. And he's saying, yeah, that's not how that works. He says, you're not going to fast as you do this day just to make your voice heard on high, just to make God hear your prayers so that you can basically afflict others. He's like, you're missing the point. He says, is it such a fast that I have chosen, a day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head as a bulrush, to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Wilt thou call this a fast and an acceptable day to the Lord? He's saying, where did you get the idea that basically just bowing down and throwing dirt on yourself and so on and so forth, that this is what constitutes a fast? This is the main purpose of the fast, is to just basically kind of self-degrade yourself, deny, to basically put yourself down and, oh, look at how humble I am and stuff like that. Now God, go strike them down. That type of thing. He's like, where did you get this idea? And then in verse 6 and 7, he outlines, this is the reason for the fast. He says, is not this the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out of thy house, when thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh? And one of the things that he's kind of getting into here is that these are the reasons for the fast. These are the reasons for the specific things that God has given them to do, which is fasting, and we're going to see later on here about the Sabbath. These are the reasons. And if you're doing them just for the sake of doing them, if you're doing them just for the sake of, well, God said to do it and I'm just going to do it and stuff because otherwise God is not going to bless me, he's not going to hear my prayer and stuff like that, he's like, you're missing the point of all this. You're completely missing the point. He said the reason for all these things is for you to liberate the oppressed. The reason for all these things is for you to provide clothes to the naked, to provide a place to stay for the homeless, to serve others. He's illustrating the point here is that the reason for the fast is for you to deny yourself, as he talks about, to deny thine own flesh. When we go without food, in the most basic sense of fasting, when we go without food, what we're doing is we're denying our flesh for the sake of the Spirit, to spend time with God. But he's going beyond that here, and he's saying it's not just for that, it's to serve others. It's denying yourself in the most basic sense, which is food, so that you can be there to provide and to serve God and others. That's the reason for the fast. He said all of this other stuff about being religious and bowing down, throwing dirt on your head and all that, that's got nothing to do with fasting. And we see this as Jesus was actually talking about things. We see this in the sense of Jesus healing on the Sabbath. In Luke chapter 13, Jesus goes and he heals a man, and the Pharisees, it says, they're all upset and they're talking to Jesus and they're like, who told you to do this on Sabbath day? You're not supposed to do any work, and so on and so forth. And Jesus kind of hits them back with, in Luke chapter 14, he was like, all right, well, which one of you guys, if your ox fell into a ditch, would not go in there and save your ox? He's like, you're missing the point of the Sabbath. You're missing the point of the fast. You're missing the point of all this. We see in Leviticus 23:25, we'll back up to 22, and it says, and when ye reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not make clean riddance of the corners of thy field. Meaning, when you're harvesting your land, don't strip it clean. Leave the corners, leave the edges and stuff like that. Neither shalt thou gather any gleaning of the harvest. So any of the fruit that kind of falls off and stuff like that, you're basically, what he's telling you here basically is, when you go through the harvest, don't pick it clean. He says, thou shalt leave them unto the poor and to the stranger. I am the Lord thy God. So, coming back to the principle of the Sabbath here, he's saying, when you take the Sabbath off, well, let me finish reading this first. So he says, I am the Lord your God, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto the children of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, in the 1st day of the month, ye shall have a Sabbath, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. Ye shall do no servile work therein. Ye shall offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord. So the point is this. When we take on the principle of the Sabbath or even of fasting, the principle is that we are to do this in a manner in which we're able to serve others. That we're denying ourselves. So one day a week we deny ourselves. We deny our own servile pursuits. Servile work being maybe the work that you do for your income, your business. These are things that serve you, that benefit you, that provide you with an income, and so on and so forth. And taking a day off and saying, God, I trust that I'm going to work 6 days, and I know that you will make that last through the 7th, because I'm going to spend that 7th day not doing for myself, but doing for others. So he goes on, coming back to Isaiah 58, and he says, and this is basically, if you do the fast right, this is what God is going to do. Then shall thy light break forth as the morning, and thy health shall spring forth speedily, and thy righteousness shall go before thee. The glory of the Lord shall be thy rear reward, which is talking about be your rear guard. So God is going to have your back. So he says that all these things are going to break forth, and that God is going to watch your back for you. Then shalt thou call, and the Lord shall answer. Thou shalt cry, and he shall say, Here I am. So when the Sabbath, or when the fast here is observed properly, God is going to watch your back. He's going to make things prosper and blossom. And I'm not talking about prosper in the sake of, or in the sense of monetary means or anything like that, but he's going to prosper your growth. He's going to do whatever it is that he calls for, but he's going to bless you. But then it goes on, and he talks about here about that when we call to him, he will hear us. When we're in trouble and we cry out to him, he will say, Here I am. And from the midst, here I am, if thou take away from the midst of thee the yoke, and putting forth of the finger, and speaking vanity. So if you do these things. And if thou draw out thy soul to the hungry, and satisfy the afflicted soul, then thou light shall rise in obscurity, and darkness shall be as the noonday. And the Lord shall guide thee continually, and satisfy the soul in drought, and make fat thy bones. And thou shalt be like a watered garden, and like a spring of water, whose waters fail not. And one thing that I want you to kind of see here is going back to Psalm 23, talking about we shall be a tree planted by rivers of water, and so on and so forth. But when we look at this, he says that you shall be like a watered garden, meaning you're going to benefit from the water. But he also says, and you will be like a spring of water also. So you're not only going to be like a garden who is benefiting from the water, but you're also going to be like a spring of water of which others benefit through you. And what he's getting into here is, again, going back to that principle that what we do for others. The fact that we're able to benefit from God so that we become a conduit through which others benefit from us. All right, so verse 12. And they that shall be of thee shall be the old waste places. Thou shalt raise up the foundations of many generations, and thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in. So it kind of reminds me of the Matthew 5 passage talking about the Beatitudes, where Jesus is saying, blessed are the peacemakers. And he talks about repairing the breach and restoring the paths and things like that. So he goes on in verse 13 and he says, If thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord honorable, and shalt honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words, then thou shalt delight thyself in the Lord, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. So in these last sections here, starting in verse 13 and going down, he's making the connection here that the fasting and the Sabbath are basically along the same principle there. So when we go and we look at Leviticus and he's talking about the Sabbath and the purpose for the Sabbath, we see that from this Isaiah passage that the core reasons, the underlying motivation behind both the fasting and the Sabbath are the same: to serve others, to serve God, to serve others. And this ties right into what Jesus said when he talked about, which of the commandments, is greatest, and he said to love your God first and to love your neighbor as yourself. He said, on these two things, all of the commandments ride. That is the basis for all these things, including the fasting and including the Sabbath. The idea is that we're doing these things for God and for others. And in doing so, we become, we are able to be heard of God, and we then benefit from that, and then others then benefit from us. And it becomes a conduit of sorts where all of those, both ourselves and all those around us, end up becoming blessed as a result of properly using the fasting and properly using the Sabbath. Not as a means to kind of glorify ourselves, not as a means to manipulate God to get him to do what we want him to do. I want my prayer answered. I want this to be done. I want this job. I want this thing. I want all these things, so therefore I'm going to go ahead and fast. And what Isaiah is talking about here is that if that's your mindset, you're completely missing the point. Because the whole idea of fasting and the whole idea of the Sabbath is to deny yourself, to put God first and others ahead of you. And in doing those things, God hears our prayers. God blesses us, and he blesses those around us. The purpose of all these things is for others and for God. And if you're using the fast and you're using the Sabbath as something to get God to do for you, then you're missing the point. And that's what Isaiah is basically getting into here in Isaiah 58. So I wanted to share that with you guys. Hopefully you're able to get through that, or you're able to get something from that as well. So anyway, God bless.